The Full View Police Minister Begicele says SAPS has been flooded with calls reporting gender-based violence in homes.
The figures looking exactly at the gender-based violence under lockdown is 2,300. You find that 184 people that have been charged for that. So sometimes these calls are repeated calls. Sometimes are people that up to this point they don't get seriousness of these calls. They will just call for funny, and when you follow those things up, you don't find them. But the issue of gender-based violence is an issue, again, as I've said before, that will have to be worked far beyond the period that we are in now. As we were in this era, we believe that the structures of the FCS, that is the Family and Child Violence Unit within the South African Police, should have been up. That's why we have given the number on specializing that 0800 150 150, so that people that they feel and they see any gender-based violence, they can call on that number so that our unit that is dealing with the numbers can respond quicker.
So early this week, you would have heard, of course, again, the minister say that the South African Police Service received 87,000 gender-based violence complaints during the first week of South Africa's 21-day national lockdown. So rights groups and a non-profit organisation, Sonke Gender Justice, says it's concerned about the possible underreporting of these incidents during this shutdown. The organisation's Nonhlanhla Skosana joins me now on the line. A very good evening to you, Sis Nonhlanhla. Thanks indeed for your time. So within just, the first week of the lockdown, these are the kinds of statistics that we're hearing from the police minister. Are you surprised at all by this figure of gender-based violence complaints?
Evening, Griselda and the viewers. Yes, they are concerning, but we know that the minister has ratified the interpretation of the numbers, because he said the numbers that are GBV related, about 2,300, and also in this 87,000, it might be numbers or calls that have been repeated. So, but we are aware that, on the issue of gender-based violence, there's a lot of challenges, and more especially in this particular time where people are at home and they are, exposed to different kinds of things. But then we know that there is also an issue around underreporting in our country, and it is very important not to take for granted that the rate of gender-based violence might increase during this period, but the concern is that what kind of services or support are we giving to GBV survivors, more especially around the issue of post-exposure prophylaxis, which needs to be taken within 72 hours of survivor exposed to rape.
Yeah. Sister Nonhlanhla, I wanted to come to that just very shortly. You speak about underreporting. The number of over 2,300 that you spoke about, you're saying that underreporting is of concern for you. What mechanisms do you think you can put in place to curb this at this time?
I think we need to make sure that the manner in which we provide services to our survivors is a very respectful manner, but also we listen to survivors. We also deal with issue of discrimination and stigmatizing survivors so that survivors could be free to report. But also we need to be able to say, how do we work around our call centers? How do we screen the calls that are coming in? But also we need to be trained. In other countries, women would call the police stations because they're afraid to say they're being abused, and they would call the police station and say, I'm ordering for a pizza. And the police officer must be able to detect that this is not just an ordinary call, but it's a call that is calling for help, and we need to be able to respond to that. What we need to do is to strengthen how we respond to the survivors of gender-based violence.
And perhaps organizations like yours, there would be a lot of reliance at this time on social workers and the healthcare workers themselves to be able to collate some of these incidences that might come through so that they don't just go unnoticed.
Definitely, because you know that the Department of Health has issued out a call to healthcare workers to work in the communities. It is important that we make sure that community healthcare workers who go to the communities are informed and know how to deal with issues of gender-based violence. We need to share information with those particular organizations so that they could be able to know where to report these cases and where to get the Tutuzela care centers, which are one-stop facility for survivors of sexual violence. And we will have ongoing conversation with different stakeholders, and we know that the civil society organization has written to different ministers regarding the concerns that they have around issues of gender-based violence. We'll appreciate if we can get, cooperation also from government regarding this issue at this present moment.
Have you picked up at all to what extent perhaps, this number that the police minister, Begicele, has given? Have there been any concerns perhaps that have come to organizations such as yours during this particular time that you've needed to perhaps step into?
We had a conversation with one of the stakeholders that we had under the Masipepe network, which is a number of organizations that are working in different provinces. They have reported that the number of cases reported to them has decreased, and that raised a concern because we already expected to see, that kind of situation during this period, because survivors will be scared to report in the presence of the perpetrators. And we know that the number of sexual violence cases that are happening in this country are happening in our homes. So it will be very challenging for a survivor to report a case when they know very well that the perpetrator is just closer to them. Yeah. And that is why we rely very strongly on the community healthcare workers who go to the communities and engage with communities to be able to assess and also provide some kind of information or support to the survivors.
We've still got quite a number of days to go, of course, before this lockdown comes to an end. If it does come to an end quite soon, you raised the issue of sexual violence. Another concern you did say would be on the issue of sexual assault and how victims can get, for example, a post-exposure prophylaxis within that 72 hours. Is there any way that you're looking at, together with a government at this point, to look at some of those challenges to ensure that you don't find survivors or victims in this instance being subjected to another form of a delay in them getting the assistance that they need?
Yes, and that is why we're saying for us it's very critical for the community healthcare workers to be equipped in terms of how to refer cases where people need to access the post-exposure prophylaxis, and our healthcare workers could advise how best maybe this medication could be received by the survivors or be packaged in a way that the survivors will be able to take the medication, because it's very important. But it also includes issues of testing. So those are some of the things that you don't just get a post-exposure prophylaxis. There's testing that needs to be done. Those are the things that need to be looked at, and how do we really prepare ourselves in this. It is quite challenging and also, disturbing to know that in preparation for everything, in most of the countries, not South Africa only, countries were not prepared to deal with issues of gender-based violence. We've seen countries where the numbers were escalating, where women were killed during the COVID-19 lockdown. So government needs to take this issue serious and also listen to civil society organizations. As I've said before, that we have a number of civil societies that have written to different ministers and other ministers to say this is how we as civil society organizations think we can deal with this issue. So we need to have a very comprehensive kind of approach in dealing with gender-based violence. And we know that people who are more at risk are children. In the statistics that we have, 41% of rape survivors are children, and children at this present moment are really at high risk.
And one would think, Sis Nonhlanhla, that in a country such as ours in South Africa, where gender-based violence is such a huge issue, it would have been one of the critical things taken into account to ensure that in environments where you might find, victims unable to escape in this instance because of the movement constraints that there are, it would have been something that would have been put quite high on the agenda to deal with before we find ourselves in these circumstances.
Definitely, because we have countries that have set aside hotels for gender-based violence survivors to be able to be in those spaces. In the recommendations that was made by the civil society is around the issues of shelters. Because if a survivor knows that if I report this case and I'm unsafe in my own space, where am I supposed to go? We've got a number of organizations that are working on issues of survivors and shelters. And those are the organizations that can give government a kind of a direction on how to deal with those issues. So it is very important for the president, and he has shown some kind of commitment to deal with gender-based violence previously. We know after the gender-based violence summit, we saw his commitment and regarding the MSP as well. And this is a time where we need to upscale that. And we're saying to him, please prioritize this issue. Make sure that you learn from other countries who have already put measures in place to be able to deal with the gender-based violence issue during this period. We know that children will be going back to school, but we need to have children who are ready to go to school, but also not experiencing trauma and not getting psychosocial support when they have survived gender-based violence.
Sonke Gender Justice's Nonhlanhla Skhosana joining us there on the line. Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening.